This is a Christian movie called A Wobot's Christmas. The kids are all orphans. They're put in a factory made to work overtime, making Christmas presents for all the other kids. And Demoto, the evil villain in the movie, is stealing all the kids' Christmas presents. You run into a character called Ma. She is a caretaker of the scrapyard. She was a nanny at an orphanage, and it must be so hard. This is Iceman. He makes the ice, right? The scrapyard is basically a care facility or a nanny house, and Demoto's plan now is to steal the kids. Okay, so you see him parading around like Adolf Hitler, right? And he's also doing the Freemasonic symbolism with his eye, the one-eye Freemasonic symbolism, right? So Ma has a tag or a license plate that has 33 written on it. So it was the mid-19th century, it was the Industrial Revolution, mid-1800s, every day. Thousands of German immigrants were flooding New York. In the late 1840s, this potato famine drove Irelanders out of Ireland and Germans out of Germany because of religious and political persecution, agricultural crisis, and the European Revolution. They maybe made that up as an excuse, but we had redheads and blondies coming to the States. So we had redheads and blondies coming into the States, boats overseas. You could have chain immigration where immigrants would go back to their countries after they came here and tell their families about how great it was in America. Immigrants created the first America's slums, right? From slavery to industrial slavery, making the kids work, living in poverty. Sickness killed a lot of the people. Cholera and tuberculosis. Overcrowded area got foreigners. They all got sick. They were all clustered up in one space here. The immigration flood created overcrowded environments and areas with foreigners that all got sick, and then parents died, but usually it's only one parent that died. Because of the Depression, they abandoned a few of their children and turned to alcohol. Now that is the narrative we are given. That's what they say. That's the narrative story that they put in place. And because they couldn't support their children on their own, problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, something major happens, or a big string of events, and then they come up with the solution to the problem that they've just created. They've turned childbirth into a tragedy at the time. Why did the people taking these kids in not tell them anything of what's going on? Why did they have to lie? Also, the Nickelodeon logo splat is an outline of the Virgin Epstein Islands. I always knew it was an island, but I never said anything. No one ever said anything. And the voice of SpongeBob, if you look up his house address on Google Maps, it's directly under the island, so maybe, I don't know. I like SpongeBob. The kids have all lost the connection with their past, right? They were taken away from their normal lives, and so they took kids away from the parents and put them on trains. They took the kids away from their parents and put them on trains to other grown-ups to become their new parents. They wouldn't let the orphaned kids get letters from their parents. They had dismembered all connections they had with their kids. And they had homeless kids sleeping on the street sidewalks under the tree beneath someone's apartment door or just out of the way of grown adults in Brooklyn. They had to form gangs. My parents' generation had to form gangs in school just to stay alive, and just like they did in the 1800s, but they're making us do it. They're putting us up to this. Someone is putting them up to this. Nothing's ever changed. There was no reason for us to put them up to that in the first place. Someone's making us do it. The Germans were the first migrants, and in the U.S., here we still had a living system that is the result of slavery and orphan train separation. They started the separation. In the US, we are still living under a system that is the result of slavery and orphan train separation. They started the separation. The kids get abused on the orphan trains. Some of them just got passed around from household to home, never finding a family that suits them, so they enhance and improve child protection laws. In other words, they just make more of them and make services for child protection. Sounds a little bit familiar now, doesn't it? They've had some rescues, some downfalls, but we should be watching our own kids at the end of the day and, protect them from anyone that tries to get in their way, of their true loving parent. Moral of the story, some had brothers and sisters they were all taken away from, and some kids were taken away from their parent even though they only had one parent that was deceased. In some cases, parents were in the hospital and they moved kids to the Far East to replace their parents, like shuffling a deck of cards or shaking a table of dominoes, resetting the checkerboard, but instead of figures, they're all families. Shuffle them around into the wrong spot and then tell the future generations that that is how you play the game of checkers. They had sent them by train in the 1870s because they had no air flight form of transportation. They did not want to go onto the trains because their parents were going to come back home for them. There were stories of kids getting moved around 4 or 5 times because in about the 1890s, CAS had developed the first supposed adoption system where they would send the kid to a group of parents, check up on them to make sure that they're taking care of the child. They make them fulfill a contract that states the requirements that you need to take part in this child adoption process. You would have to, have a child. You would have a child delivered right to you. They had so many kids at their disposal, like you could literally specify what child you wanted with blonde hair and blue eyes, or black hair that's curly. A certain amount of education was one of the requirements, of course. They made newspaper factories. They made newspaper factories for runaway orphaned kids, which really helped out, and then Brace made an adoption system where other adults would take the child. A lot of farmers needed extra hands, supposedly. In the industrial era, police would hang orphan kids publicly in front of the other kids to deter them. No, to make a statement to show them not to do it again. They would send kids as young as 5 in jail with adults during the industrial era. In the 1800s, the Germans were promised a good life, and when they got here, they created the first supposed quote-unquote slumps here in the Americas. They ended up going homeless because there weren't enough jobs. They were told, it's the land of the free, you can do whatever you want and be whatever you want and do whatever you want to do and work whatever job you desire. You can have any job you want. This was supposedly America's first welfare experiment. Bring people from other countries to America, make us richer with other prisoners, right? The orphans were overworked at factories and warehouses, and we had nanny houses that were so bad here that the orphans chose rather to be homeless than living in, they chose rather to be homeless living out in the street than a nanny house. So they were rarely fed. They had to steal food. And for that, they would be hung publicly in front of their peers for stealing, and you would either not eat or be killed by Mr. Popo. Here in America, orphaned kids were prostituting themselves just in order to survive in Lower Manhattan. Each child needs an individual caretaker in order to live. They deprived them from legal parental guardianship at their orphanages and their nanny houses. So in conclusion, the Irish and German people were transported by trains and ships because they didn't have air travel in the 1850s during the height of the Industrial Revolution. The supposed narrative today is that the people moved to America because America was promised as freedom and a new start and a land of opportunity, so they came here, and there were a lot of cases of Germans with other foreigners coming here to the US, went back to their homeland to spread the word to their family members to reconfirm that America is indeed the best country ever formed. So then they all came back to our country, and then we have this epidemic of cholera and hepatitis or whatever it was, and then we have this epidemic or whatever it was outbroke, and then there were all too many foreigners, meaning more Germans and Irish, meaning more people, meaning not enough jobs, creating death and alcoholism, creating orphans, children who had no parents, pilgrims. They were all divided and taken away from their heritage, removed, I should say. Orphans, man. They wanted to leave their homeland because of the European Revolution and famine. I don't see how that's worse than what we put kids up to here in the US. After they left their homes, they couldn't find work. Kids became homeless. They worked orphans real hard in the factories. Orphans didn't get paid much. Germans, white people with blonde hair created America's first slums. Kids didn't make enough to afford housing. Bad for sustainability. This was very bad for the economy. In retrospect, economists should not have labeled this as such a great country after all, so the kids had nowhere to live, under an apartment or in New York, Brooklyn, under a bench, under a tree, out of people's way, so CAS, Children's Aid Society, would go on to make America's first adoption program, so they took the kids away from their parents. Oftentimes, only one of the parents would die from getting sick, the other might go to a hospital. And when they went to the hospital, it's the opportune time for them to take the child away. So ragamuffins. When they got back, bam, the child is gone. And with no telephone communication service, that they had no way to find their kid. Essentially taking that kid away without any means of getting it back. Without any way of getting it back. Bust by train to a care facility without ever being told about their parents or why they were there. Taken to new parents or a nanny house. An awful place for harboring kids with only one nanny to contend with the kids. You need at least one caretaker per kid. Kids were homeless. They were often taken away because kids were homeless. They were taking away kids from their parents when they were coming back. They didn't make enough to live, so it was either steal or don't eat at all. And eventually the police cops started hanging child orphans who would steal in front of another group of kids to get them to stop stealing as a statement. Police officers would oftentimes hang them from the nearest tree in front of all their peers, and if they didn't, they would go send them to the big house. And Cabbage Patch Kids. Prison. And kids were on the street with older gang members who were adults about... God, talk about the migrant crisis. Talk about a stock market crash. You call it America's first welfare experiment. CAS care facilities had so many kids that you could order a kid with any eye, hairstyle, color, specifications, and now with the black people crisis, this is just history repeating itself. Just remember to never trust the government, and in my opinion, personally, what I'm thinking is that if you ever see a police officer, hang them from the nearest tree publicly, okay? I think that the insane asylums were built for the Rockefellers and Rothschilds. They are the lizard people, shapeshifters, and they're Ashkenazi Khazarians that worship Baphomet at the synagogue of Satan, and they made our school system. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government, and I'm here to help." Ronald Reagan, 1986. Orphans are so very viable. They may be missed, but not that much. A Robot's Christmas. Demodo, the villain. With the little eye, right? So yeah, a potato famine was so bad that it drove Irelanders out of Ireland. That was the big goal. Bring people from other countries to come into America so that we can become richer with people prisoners. That's why we needed That is why we need a civvy-owned people response team that can take on the military and replace cops. We need civilian arrests to be the #1 arrests in 2026. It's 11:33. The whole thing really goes to show how loose and rigged our missing child exploitation and death to kids system is, and how people have been going along with it since before 1920s.